All right, so we back. It's uh-oh. So we back. It's Canaan Powers and Faya. Faya, you there?
This is Fire, as in faithful Yah.
All right. So today we just gonna talk about some reports written by the United Nations about the U.S. Racism in the U.S. Against African Americans specifically. So we just gonna go over a few talking points about these articles, about the significance of them, how we feel about them, and we're gonna try to give y'all some details about the articles and some quotes and things that y'all can go back and research for yourselves as well. So, with that being said, Faya kind of brought this to my attention. So, if you want to just give a brief explanation as to why you thought it was even important or why you read through the reports once you found out about them.
Yeah, man. So the report in question that we're talking about, uh, these specific reports, they refer to the UN reports on structural racism in the United States. And I think they're important and interesting in more than one aspect. One is that from a historical point of view, it sort of indicates the role of the foreign and worldwide perspective and what's happening to Blacks in America and what role that plays currently and what role has it played historically in what happens inside the United States. In other words, when the eyes of the world are on a nation and the human rights atrocities that are going on in that nation, sometimes a global witness, it helps to put pressure on that nation to, correct those atrocities that are going on and to be held accountable, at least in terms of media and getting eyes on the problem. And sometimes that translates into real action.
Hmm.
It's sort of like if a nation can get away with doing things in private and hidden, then it can go on a lot longer and there can be sort of less witnesses to what's happening. And then the other thing I think is uh, it's just interesting, and it's a legitimization. It can be a legitimization in our eyes, for example, when we see all the members of the United Nations specifically addressing the concerns of what's happening here in the United States with such precision and such intimate detail. It, in my opinion, it can lend legitimacy and credence to what we see happening. But within the scope of our own country, we're often told that it's either not happening or we're being vague, or
Hmm.
maybe racism is an issue, maybe not. Well, Magic Johnson made it and so did Oprah, so is it really real and is it my fault, or what's going on if niggas just get their act together?
Hmm.
And so there's all this confusion about it within the context of our own media systems and propaganda and dominant culture. But when you see an outside perspective come in and so concisely cite what the problem is and what is being seen, um, I think it's very interesting in that context because it's legitimizing.
Hmm. No, that makes sense. Like you said, from to get an outside perspective is always good. So and for them to be so concise, like you said, and really pinpoint the problems that we see are problems. That is affirmation. Like we're not crazy out here. Somebody is acknowledging what we've been saying for generations. Um,
Right. It's sort of like when you're like, hey, man, you see something and you turn to somebody next to you, you need another set of eyes. Like, am I tripping or is this,
right,
is
right.
this
Did
what
you
I'm
see that?
seeing?
Yeah.
And when that other person can validate it, you're like, okay, yeah, man, because I thought I might have been,
Yep.
going crazy at first. I thought I was tripping.
Exactly. No, that's real, man. So I know the article I can't remember exactly the news article, but the writer was Ben Norton. Um, and I was just gonna go through a few things that stood out to me as I was reading the article, and kind of my reaction to that, and to let the audience know, we did draft this information from a few articles that we got online, so you can actually reference these articles if you want to learn more about them or if we missed something. So one of the things that it kind of started out with was saying that the United Nations condemns, which is a powerful word, mass incarceration, drug war, human rights crisis, and police killings in the U.S. against African American people. So it's real specific, um, and it's and it calls for reparations. So I think that's also important because the United Nations is calling for reparations for Black people specifically, and that's huge. Um, just reading it and looking at it like, man, that's what we talking about. But me being skeptical because I just know that racism is a worldwide thing. So my question is like, why now? Now, this article was written in 2016, but still the question is why 2016? What happened to make the United Nations feel that it was important to address this issue? Is it really something they want to do to help better African American people, or are they just trying to, poke at the United States because there's some underlying political agenda, and they're just using, African Americans as a way to get their foot in the door, for whatever political reason. So what's your take on kind of that stance? That's kind of what I got from just that. Like I said, that's just the beginning, kind of introduction of that article. And that was just kind of my take from it. Did you want to comment on that?
Well, yeah, man. I think that sometimes you can look at things from a practical purpose, and sometimes from a sort of a critic with a critical eye. And what I mean by that is, okay, so if an opportunity arises, so say, okay, say and I love my metaphors and allegories, but
Mm-hmm.
you go somewhere and you're gonna say take out a new credit card that promises you 10% cash back on every purchase.
Mm-hmm.
uh, from a critical eye, it could be, okay, what is the credit card company's motive for doing that? Do they care that I get cash back? uh,
Mm-hmm.
is that their primary motivation, or do they feel like they're going to get something out of it? Now, it could be that they plan to get something out of it, right? Which is likely in the case of a credit card company.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be sort of a consideration, but it would, I'm not sure. What I would have to do is weigh that consideration with the benefit that I am, planning or strategically working towards. So, say I have a budget and I say, well, I want to increase my credit rating,
Mm-hmm.
and I want to save money and do all these things. So then, if I can look at that offer and say, regardless, either they're going to get something out of it or they're not. But either way, does it fit? Does it fit what I'm doing?
Right.
And sometimes it'll come down to that, because sometimes the motivation, there's a cost benefit analysis that's done. So when you look at the UN putting out a report that calls for and demands reparations on behalf of Black people, and they are not sort of shoehorning maybe an LGBTQ or feminist or anything like this. Like, you
Right.
don't see any other obvious motivations that are going to be in the way. It could be a useful thing.
Mm-hmm. That's
And
fair enough.
right, I think from a critical point of view, if we're already moving right northbound, and we're going to the city, and we look over, and here comes somebody in the other lane that wants to give us fuel, or It's a stop where we can fuel up and just anything that helps us get to our destination. I think that it can be useful
Hmm.
regardless of the motive. So,
Yeah.
uh,
No, that's a fair way to look at it. I can agree with that. But yeah, that's kind of my first thing is I'm always a little skeptical when somebody's offering help for black people, um, because a lot of people steal from us or they want something from us, and we just don't focus on like what other people's motives can be. Because sometimes I think it's frowned upon when we kind of question people's help for us. And I think that it's a time and place for it though, because you want to make sure that you're really getting the best out of the deal. You don't want to be tricked into something else, because somebody's just trying to use you to get over on somebody else. But
yeah, that's true.
I think that what you said is a fair way to look at it, and definitely a positive way of looking at it, versus negatively. I don't have that article pulled up, but if you do have it, if you want to read a little bit from it, we can read the actual article.
Okay, well, I do have it here in front of me. I was sort
Okay.
of flipping through it, uh, and maybe could just read some of the salient points. Man, I tell you,
Yeah.
this whole thing is heavy.
Okay.
And this opening statement, like you said, to me is very powerful. Uh, and again, I'll just read some excerpts from it. But to me, there are so many impactful phrases, and it's so unfiltered in a
Mhm.
sense, in a political sense, that I would advise everybody to actually just read it. I mean, it's this particular article is a take on the UN report.
Okay.
And just to summarize it for all the listeners, the United Nations, they have a Council on Human Affairs that sort of is a global watch group. They don't have sort of military enforcement, but what they do is they watch for civil rights violations around the world, and they sort of make these reports. So it's sort of a watchdog agency, information gathering agency, etc. And the list of members of the United Nations is a very extensive list. It's basically most all developed countries. So
Mhm.
the title of this article is "Scathing UN Report: Structural Racism Endures in the United States, and the Government Has Failed to Protect African Americans' Rights." A subtext here says UN group condemns mass incarceration, drug war, human rights crises of police killings, and calls for reparations, by Ben Norton, published October 7, 2016. And so, let's see. Just an opening quote from this is there's a profound need to acknowledge that the transatlantic trade in Africans, enslavement, colonization, and colonialism were a crime against humanity and are among the major sources and manifestations of racism, racial discrimination, Afrophobia, xenophobia, and related intolerance. Past injustices and crimes against African Americans need to be addressed with reparatory justice. It says, despite some gradual gains over the decades, the working group cautioned that it remains extremely concerned about the human rights situation of African Americans, in particular, the legacy of colonial history, enslavement, racial subordination and segregation, racial terrorism, and racial inequity in the United States remains a serious challenge, as there has been no real commitment to reparations and to truth and reconciliation for people of African descent. So, yeah, man.
Yeah.
That being said, it's to me, it's novel. Like one of the things I wanted to talk about in this that I find interesting is that besides it being refreshing and legitimizing, like we said, just sort of what does this mean in terms of the ongoing struggle that we have undertaken in the United States for not just African, not just our own rights as Black Americans and descendants of slaves in this country, but by extension, all of humanity, because there's more at stake than just what we stand to gain or lose, right?
Mhm.
It's an ongoing legacy struggle that is a marathon of generations that we are involved in, and what's at stake, I believe, like in the same sense that uh, how the defeat of Hitler and Nazi Germanism didn't just mean salvation for Eurocentric Jewish people,
Mhm.
but it meant the bringing to heel of a tyrant, of a manifesto of white supremacy that would have eventually, that sought to control and take over the planet. And
Mhm.
I don't think this is anything less,
Mhm.
though we be just Black people in the United States who they claim is just looking for a check. I think there's way more at stake, not just for us, but for people groups. So my question is, this report in particular from the United Nations that we're looking at now, what does it mean, if anything, um, towards our struggle? And is it a plus? Is it a negative? Or is it just a neutral thing, a voice in the wilderness, as it were?
Mhm.
Uh,
No, that's a good question. Um, that's a real good question, and I personally, I think it's a little too early to say for sure. But just off of, if I was just to guess, I would say that this is a good step forward for us. Um, but definitely, it's gonna have to be a follow through. Like it just needs to be more follow through, basically, or even just the lack of a response from America to the report to me is a no follow through, because it's like, what does that report mean if they don't even have to acknowledge that they read the report? Or if they don't feel like they should address the fact that the United Nations is calling them out for it. Like, basically those type of things will make me um, see if the United Nations is serious. Because if America don't acknowledge the report, if the United Nations don't do, have another step in process, like what else are they gonna do or say to kind of keep that fire going if they want to light it? That's kind of my stance
okay.
on it at this point.
And that's interesting that you say that. I have here a note I sort of scribbled down. And basically, to sort of, to sort of, I concur with that. The
Hmm.
thing is, when someone recognizes, it's almost like if you have a person that's putting forth effort and doing something,
Hmm.
there can be a voice of encouragement.
Hmm.
Oftentimes, a voice of encouragement is sort of like if you have a coach or a personal trainer or something, it means that you may still be the one doing the heavy lifting and the lifting,
Right.
but the results can be, you can be motivated. You can be let to know that you're on the right track, that you're doing well, that you're going to get those results, that someone is recognizing your effort, that it's not all in vain, as it were, because sometimes just knowing that you have an ear, it can go a long way towards the effort. And in saying that, there's one example I want to cite. When we go back to, we talk about slavery and emancipation.
Hmm.
Oftentimes we think, and I'm not sure if we mentioned on this channel before, but that emancipation just happened when, right, the morality of the country decided that it was time to do so, and that whites in particular started to empathize with the plight of the Negro, and that it was just time. However, there were other factors that happened beyond
Hmm.
which, uh, obviously, it was the financial interests of the North and the South came at odds with each other. There was a financial conflict, and
Hmm.
there was a segregating economy within the United States that could be said to be one of the primary fuels of even the spike in the abolitionist movement of the day, and the sort of efforts to end slavery But also, one thing I think that gets overlooked historically is the foreign policy pressure that Lincoln was under. I have here an article. It's called The Emancipation Proclamation Was Also Foreign Policy.
Mm,
Uh, this was an article written by Steve Jones, was updated February 1st, 2019. And I'm going to just take some liberty at just quotes here. It's everyone knows that when Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, he was, quote unquote, freeing enslaved Americans. But did you know the abolition of slavery was also a key element of Lincoln's foreign policy? Skipping down here in the article, when Lincoln issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation in September 1862, England had been threatening to intervene in the American Civil War for over a year.
mm,
So here you have a country that's divided, it's engaged in an actual civil war where it's fighting against itself. And you have a foreign entity that's watching. And the threat of intervention uh, was amongst the things on the president of the United States' mind.
mm,
Now, obviously, in this case, it meant a direct military intervention, most likely maybe an economic intervention. We know there were threats of embargoes against the United States. Uh, but the concept of a country being divided against itself and then foreign entities being able to take sort of an occasion or an advantage of that, even if it's in that foreign entity's quest for power or a greater foothold in the
mm,
on the world stage. What it resulted in 1862 was at least, the emancipation on paper, you
mm.
know.
Right, right.
And so here we have a situation where the United States is literally at, I believe, at civil war. You have law enforcement institutions versus the citizenry. You have
Mm,
the same elements of conservatism and liberalism, which run in the same circles in many instances, but at least expressly and for terms of propaganda, you have these oppositional forces.
mm,
And now you have politicians at the level of president and, marketing that are forced to sort of do shows of humanitarianism or civil rights, upholding civil rights, and talking about police reforms and etc.
right.
Uh, would those topics and even the topics of reparation that were talked about on the presidential and the candidacy level for president, would those conversations and things be happening in secrecy if there were a shroud over the happenings in the United States? Or does the world, does the advent of technology and that the world is literally watching play a role in that? That's a question. The rest of this quote says Lincoln's intent to issue the final document on January 1863 effectively prevented England, which had abolished enslavement in its own territories, from stepping into the U.S. conflict. Often we see uh, nations, such in this case, England, was prevented from the level of intervention that it would have been able to take had the United States sort of, at least on paper, cleaned up its own house.
Mm,
And
right.
we see the United States attempting to criticize China for its handling of the corona and its sort of what it was doing to Africans there in China, allegedly. And then
Mm,
China quickly pointing out how the United States treats Black people in these
mm,
borders. So I think that historically, just citing that Emancipation Proclamation as being like sort of a very salient and obvious instance that we can point to, I think that, and even then, in that case, Black people had to take up arms and help fight in a civil war.
right.
So it's we do the heavy lifting for ourselves. It's not that without the efforts of Black people, and the ongoing struggle, there wouldn't have been anything for sort of England to say, hey, we're going to intervene in that ongoing issue you got there. We're the ones that are carry sort of the struggle and the fight and the legacy that others are looking to and citing, because we have to be alive, right, in order for them to, in order for this, this whole
Right.
thing to be a consideration in the first place. But yeah, my opinion would be, it's on us to do the heavy lifting, but I think that it can be an opportunity. And we're citing the 2016. Did you have anything on that, man?
No, yeah, I mean, there was a lot of good points that you touched on, but I think the overall thing that I would say to that is, like you said, like you mentioned, England was kind of putting some pressure on the U.S. Um, and we got some paperwork and a response from the U.S. You see what I'm saying? Like the follow through, and then like you said, the black people, how we had to do the heavy lifting, and I think that all of those things from these reports, I want to see, something along those lines as well. But I will also just like to see African American people have learning from our mistakes from the past, anything that we may have stumbled over. I think it's important that we make sure we don't make those mistakes again, just to wind up in the same predicament in another 100 years. Because even the abolishment of slavery and the condemning of slavery, um, was a good thing, but we know that a lot of things were able to creep underneath those documents because of the appearance that America was going in the right direction. But we know
Right.
now that we are here today that that was more of an illusion than an actuality, because it was pretty much a conversion. It was an abolishment of slavery or not, and in my opinion, it wasn't, because people are starting to understand that it was just converted into the prison system. And there's a lot of evidence that support that when the slaves were freed, they pretty much just criminalized their actions, things like not working. So imagine telling a slave that they free and then criminalizing them from not having a job. Because you probably ain't gonna want to work after you've been a slave for who knows how long. But things like loitering, they had no place to go. They started making those things illegal, so you just see that that was really a conversion. So with the condemning of America in the way that it's treating black people, I think is definitely excellent. But I just hope that there's a follow through from America, and I hope that us as a black people have learned from those mistakes to make sure that we are sitting at the table when it really comes to the political aspects of following through. Basically, that's where I'm kind of at. So I like the fact that you brought that up as a reference, and you made those points that you made.
Yeah, man, I agree with that. And I do believe that I think practically uh, what we're doing here, even just this, just having the conversation
Hmm.
and on this relatively smaller level, right? We don't have the scope of the United Nations platform or reports,
Right.
but in the sense of us learning from our mistakes and from the past, that means learning implies having access to the knowledge.
Hmm.
So I think the problem that we face is that oftentimes our people are starved and deprived of knowledge. Same way we are deprived and starved of many nutritional things, right? Nutritional food, like we touched on in another episode. Nutrition is not just foodstuffs, it's also knowledge and information that you
Hmm.
need for growth and processing. And oftentimes we're deprived of that, or it's sort of pushed aside, and what's presented mainstream is a lot of entertainment. So I think like what we're doing here, I think it's in line, in agreement with the the adage of each one teach one. So
Hmm.
even if we don't have a huge platform to present information to people so that they can learn,
Right.
right, is it's I mean, I think it's a necessary step in that, us learning from our past mistakes and not repeating the same issues. Like we have to know about them first. A
Hmm.
lot of people, a lot of our people, sadly, it seems like they just dropped into this day like out of out of out of the sky, out of the
Mhm.
current.
Right.
Like that, there was no yesterday,
Yeah,
and
that's
there's
true.
no tomorrow. There's just today.
Mhm.
And being in the moment like that is not good when you're talking life-size chess, right?
Right.
If you're on a chessboard and you're a pawn and you're just standing there, you have no idea what's going on all around you on that board.
Mhm.
And you have to draw back, have a greater perspective, look at all these different pieces and how they moved and how they've moved, so that you can know what a long-term strategy looks like. And that's sort of part of, I think, is what's on us to do, and each one teach one.
Yep. No, that's real. I like that. So did you want to was you gonna read any more of the article before I want to move on if it was something else because I would like to still address some of those things because we did just hit a piece of it, but like you said, that the article was deep, and just so y'all know, like that's just the this is really just the surface of how important this article is, in my opinion. So I don't want to skip over anything if you wanted to continue on with that.
Let me just do this. I'll
Okay.
summarize each of the categories. No, I'll read the headers of each of the categories it addresses, just to spark the listener's interest and
Okay.
motivate them to go look it up. And then if it's okay, I'll read a couple of paragraphs from the section on police violence
Okay.
in particular.
Yeah, let's get into
So
that.
the one we read first was, for the listeners, and I don't, we don't want to sound condescending, but just reiterating some of these things. Like when you talk about an article in the summary, usually that first paragraph or the header is going to be what the article, it's going to be what the main topic of the article is in general, and
Hmm.
what they're going to attempt to argue for or talk about. In this case, we already cited about reparations. This is essentially most of everything that is talked about in this article is to support that primary thesis of, reparations, that African Americans, part of repairing something means reparation.
Hmm.
Sometimes that's uh, economic reparation is a huge part of reparation, but it's not the only thing.
Hmm.
That being said, there's a section here on police violence. After that general statement, there's a police violence. There's one on mass incarceration. There is one on poverty, homelessness, and social services. There's the next is on schools and the youth. The next is on civil rights laws. And then there's a summary. So I just want to read a few statements from this section here on police violence. Uh, Police violence and bias in the criminal justice system are some of the most critical issues addressed in the UN report. Black Americans are disproportionately targeted for police surveillance and experience and witness public harassment, excessive force, and racial discrimination, the group said, adding, racial profiling is a rampant practice. It cited the Department of Justice report on the racially biased policing practices in Ferguson, Missouri, as an example of this institutional discrimination. The UN group exposed a deep concern at the alarming levels of police brutality and excessive use of lethal force by law enforcement officials committed with impunity against people of African descent in the United States. The report cited the killings of unarmed Black Americans such as Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, and Laquan McDonald, and noted that police officers have rarely been held accountable for these crimes despite the evidence. It also criticized the lack of an official national system in the US that documents police killings. Federal authorities said the absence of this system is largely because the country's 18,000 police departments and law enforcement agencies are not required to report killings. The group said it welcomes the growing human rights movement in the United States, recognizing the efforts of civil society networks such as Black Lives Matter. Um, So, and it called for the development of policing strategies that give the community control of the police. The report recommended that communities make boards and approve the elect police officers. So, this is just an example of that. This
Mhm.
reminded me of our episode we did on entanglement, this specific statement where it said it welcomes the growing human rights movement in the United States. I think
Mhm.
that's a very concise summary because if you look at the perspective of someone that's watching, and then it says they welcome the growing human rights movement in the United States, that
Mhm.
infers that there is a growing human rights movement in the United States. That's our part. And
Right.
then they are sort of watching and welcoming,
Mhm.
recognizing the efforts. And I think it sort of I just thought that was
Yeah. No, that's 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 really good. And I noticed because I kind of took note on that part where they were criticizing the lack of an official system in the U.S. that documents police killings. Um, that stood out to me because I'm like, I don't think a lot of people know that and understand that and what that even means because we talking about a law enforcement agency across the country who keep track of all the crimes that people commit, but they're not keeping track of their own conduct. That's just fishy. I mean, it's not that hard to keep track of something like that because you have to have reports um, and things for any arrest or any kind of police incident. So why wouldn't you have something that the public can access or even the United Nations can access that's documenting how many killings are even happening? Because if these are the killings that we see, it ain't no telling how many we don't even know about. That's the scary part, when you really
right.
think about it, especially as African American people.
And it's ridiculous that you can go online and you can find statistics and database in the database about, how many citations were issued. Was it
Right.
parking? Was it speeding? There are cameras that catch the speeding. You can go in, you can look that up. If you want to go tomorrow, you can go find probably your entire history of every citation you've ever been handed out and
Mhm.
the number of the officer that issued it by county, by division, by organization. But
Mhm.
yet, killing, like,
Right.
you can issue someone a ticket and that's very well documented. But
Right.
kill someone and,
No need to
you
record
gotta
that.
go find, yeah, you gotta go look that up on in the newspapers maybe, or
Yeah.
interview family members because, but then again, killing civilians isn't the same mechanism that they would use to make money. Issue a
Mhm.
citation, you get money, you
Right.
want to pursue them, you want to get those fines, and
Right.
then you want to increase those fines for late fees and etc. You know,
Yep.
so I
Yeah.
guess they have an incentive to document certain things, right?
Yeah, obviously. And another thing when I was reading through it, they mentioned how the US wasn't cooperating with the UN's human rights mechanisms by not giving them access to Mississippi State penitentiary records. So again, these are the things that I was kind of noticing where I think the United Nations is doing a huge thing by making this report, and I would just hope that they would back up African Americans because I believe once people read about this, um, it is gonna spark an initiative for them to get up and go do something because you feel like you got somebody watching and they sound like they're in support of you, in favor of what you're doing. So when we start demanding, more things, more accountability, um, us getting access to, you know, police records, public records, by the way. This is supposed to be public stuff. However, if there's an ongoing investigation, they have a lot of loopholes where they'll say we can't release certain information. But my thing is about when the investigation is closed, there really should be a easier process where we, the public people, can get access to police records. But you can barely get access to police camera footage, just regular traffic stops that didn't involve any kind of investigation. But if you go request like police cam footage from a certain officer because you just want to analyze their conduct, they'll say, well, you have to be the party who who was getting cited. And I think that that's ridiculous because how are we really going to crack down on misconduct if we can't view the conduct of police officers on a regular basis, not just during a killing, but just aggressive tones and a police officer's voice, things that we can catch as citizens to say, hey, we need to check this officer out because he might not have killed nobody yet, but based off of what we've seen in his previous 100 traffic stops, he got the itch. We don't have access to the information. So I think by them not giving not cooperating with the UN makes us as African Americans more responsible to press them, because now we have to say we know it's not just us that they're refusing to let this information out for. But we know it's something that they're hiding, because that's the only reason you wouldn't give out that information. And that was kind of a lot of blabber, but I just wanted to make that clear that I thought that that was significant.
Oh yeah, that makes sense, man. Yeah, that makes sense. And even if the person, whether the person, um, gets to the point of killing or taking a life or whatever, I think all of that other history, that track record is enough in and of itself, because you don't want people negatively impacting the lives of others, their self-esteem, their states of their mood,
Mhm.
depression, and all these sorts of things that get exacerbated by the fear of driving around, or the increased tension when
Yeah.
you look and you see a squad car behind you, and they follow you or whatever. I mean, that in and of itself, it's a crime against humanity in and of itself.
Mhm.
It's enough. You don't have to kill people immediately to torture them to death,
Right.
or even
Exactly.
torture them to the day they die. There's a lot of aspects that come into stressing a person. It's like, you can have you have if you turn a faucet on and you let it just drip, 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 drip. Yeah, each particular drop may not be something that drives you insane, but over time, the constant nagging, the drip, 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 and at one point it gets to the anticipation of it, that overall it becomes, you know, just like something that can be maddening.
Mhm.
And this sort of looming presence, and this sort of harassing, even the micro and mid level aggressions and
Mhm.
disrespect by law enforcement,
Right.
it can be paralyzing, either in the immediate or over time. and
Yeah.
and that's an injustice in and of itself. Death is just physical death. It's just like the ultimate sort of culmination of all that.
Yeah. No, it's definitely true, and that just made me think of a story that a friend of mine was telling me about. She was pulled over. This is a lady. She was pulled over by a police officer, and it was a traffic stop. I think she said it was speeding. However, she asked the officer um, what she was being pulled over for, and he told her that he didn't have to disclose that at the moment. He was asking her for her ID and proof of insurance, and she was insisting on knowing what the traffic stop was for initially or in the first place. And she said that the police officer told her in front of her two daughters that if she didn't cooperate with him, he's going to snatch her out of the car and frisk her in front of her kids. And she said that was a quote. So he said it in a threatening manner, like, well, what does that mean that you're going to frisk me in front of my kids? Is that like a sexual harassment type of thing? And she basically just said that from that point on, like, she has this kind of anxiety now with dealing with police officers. And she said that was the first encounter where she had that type of aggression from a police officer. So just to kind of piggyback off what you were saying, like that type of terror or that type of trauma that people have to face every day is definitely a crime against humanity. So
It is, no doubt, no questions
yeah,
about it.
that's crazy.
And again, we encourage people to look up this report. This is a concise way to look at it. The article we just cited, but you can access the direct report. but
Hmm.
it does talk about that. It talks about sort of the microaggressions and the cumulative effect of sort of everyday, ordinary acts of racism and aggression that are actually carried out or inferred, and to the as some extent it becomes it's real, and it becomes also anticipated and imagined in the minds of the victim, which
Yeah,
is, a bad way to be. And people that are victims of this surely understand what we're what we're talking about
yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Definitely go out and read the article because, like I said, it's stuff that we probably won't even be able to touch on because there's so much, and you definitely want to have a good understanding about the importance of what they're saying. But we should also look at it with basically look at it real closely, fine comb, through it. Not just look at it as good or bad, but really read about it and formulate an opinion and start doing some things to help use this as a catalyst for something bigger.
Yeah, and I don't know if we mentioned, like, in the future we plan to I think we talked about that, or people chatting in their
Yeah,
questions or concerns in the
definitely.
comments section there, and then talking or bringing a topic to light or an opinion, and then we look at it, possibly saying what the next topic or conversation will be that we'll look into.
Yeah, we can definitely answer those questions because this is definitely meant to be informative, as well as we giving our opinions. That's obvious, but we definitely want this to be something that people can learn from as well, including us.
Definitely. So we had another one. Was there more you had on that one? I know we were gonna.
Actually, it was one more thing that I was just kind of thinking about is the U the United Nations. This was the 2016 report. They call for more thorough civil right laws. And another one of my question was again, what's more thorough than anti-discrimination laws that clearly say you can't discriminate against people for race, age, sex, religion, etc. So some of the stuff, in my opinion, was still, like I said, I like the fact that they addressed it, but I did question like how much weight would it really hold because I feel like a lot of things are in place, but without someone who really is gonna back African Americans, militarily, where we can have a security and knowing that we won't just be slaughtered if we go up against our oppressors, based off what somebody else is encouraging us to do. I think that it still gives me just this notion of just political. You're just doing it to cross it off of a list, but I don't know what the follow through is going to look like because it's a lot of laws that are already in place set to protect African Americans. But again, like that's not really super important. But I did want to throw that out there from that last article. Again, I want people to go read it, so that's why I threw it out there because you really got to read through everything. Some of it is super super strong and motivating, and other pieces of it it's just kind of like, yeah, whatever. So definitely go read that article. But yeah, let's move on to the next one.
Yeah, man, and I would play devil's advocate on that.
No, please do, please do. That's the
But I think that they so here on this civil rights laws is just this first opening statement. It says current civil rights laws are not being fully implemented, the report warned, and even if fully implemented, they are insufficient to overcome and transform the institutional and structural racial discrimination and racism against people of African descent. Although the group called for new, more thorough civil rights laws, it cautioned that these alone are not enough. The UN group cited perceived disparities in the commitment levels and capacities of state and local governments to implement civil rights legislation. So I think on one hand, like you said, they're sort of talking, right? They don't have any, I don't think if we decided we were going to take up arms and the right to bear arms, and, cite some clauses and demand that the cops tell us why they pulled us over in accordance with
Mhm.
existing statutes and civil rights laws. I don't think we could expect like sort of the UN to come rappelling in off helicopters and
Right, right.
back us up, but I think that I think they do like they. I think they say that they recognize that the existing laws are either not enough, and
Right,
then B, even the ones that we have, they're not enforced,
right.
not enforced in our favor until it comes to. It's funny, for example, when you talk about, say, for example, it's Title 5 of the Civil Rights legislation,
Mhm.
I believe, um, and it allows for people to have to be put. In essence, it allows for people that individuals have to be put on the same footing as other individuals. And in certain cases, it's so, for example, someone comes from another country specifically under Title 5, they can, the government here has to pay for them to have an interpreter, for
Mhm.
example, or for providers here for certain social services to be culturally sensitive, including their language. Okay, so we got to speak to this person in a way they understand, and tax money has to go to that. So this is specifically a civil rights quote unquote victory that was won on the heels of the civil rights movement, that is applied with prejudice to foreigners and to immigrants. Like,
Mhm.
not hating on immigrants, but when you talk about the UN that comes in and says, hey, there's not enough civil rights legislation and laws, and the ones that you have, they're not sort of enforced to the benefit of Black Americans. However, they're enforced to the benefit of, other sort of this ambiguous umbrella for other people and descendants who were not even here necessarily during the struggle of the civil rights era, which was supposed to be a struggle in the direction of reparations to make people whole and repair people from Jim Crow, from sharecropping eras, from Jim Crow, from imprisonment, from police brutality, discrimination, segregation, all this stuff.
Mhm.
And yet you have laws that then go on the book that are used in favor of immigrants. Again, not hating on immigrants, but it's very
Right.
interesting. So yeah, man,
Yeah,
I
no,
I, I
definitely.
digress,
No,
man.
no, that's cool. But I like that because I think that both points of views are very important. That's what we need. We need that balance, especially when we even talking about these things. But we definitely need balance in the actual offices where people are making these policies. And basically, I don't want to see black people get gassed up because you got this report from the United Nations. And then you like, yeah, yeah, man, we about to go do something about this. It's kind of like somebody telling somebody being domestically abused, for example, and you tell them, hey, don't take that. You better let them know how you feel, blah blah blah. And this person like, yeah, man, stop beating on me, blah blah blah. And then them people leave, and now you stuck there with the abuser, and
uh,
it's like, oh, it's about to go down because they not really, you know what I mean? Like that's my thing. Like
right,
I
right.
appreciate it, and it's not that what they're saying is not right. I 100% like it. I just, like I said, it's too early for me to just say that I'm gonna be super gassed up about it, but I want to be. Like that's the thing. I want to
Well,
be motivated by it, but I have to be cautious because I understand the complexity of the type of oppression that we really are in.
like, yeah, man, but and yeah, to sort of go back to what the way I look at it is this. This one that we're talking about was out in 2016.
Yep.
Even before 2016, in different shapes and forms, the UN has been commenting on the situation in the United States, especially as it pertains to African Americans. Even when we go back to the back in the day, I want to say 50s, maybe it was the
Mhm.
50s, uh, when you had the Communist Party that was sort of becoming involved in the affairs of the United States. You had black people sort of had a sympathetic ear and a voice with the Communist Party that were part and parcel of other nations like Russia, etc. And they were saying, "Hey, what you're doing to black people is wrong, and
Mhm.
we're going to educate them. We're going to, invite black people." And I believe at one point, even it was Chavez, Hugo Chavez, and that
Mhm.
it actually invited and offered black people passage to, is it, yeah, I want to say, maybe, was it Venezuela, Argentina,
Mhm.
anyway, to his country. And forgive me for that ambiguity, but to
No.
his country in passage, and say, hey, we'll make you citizens. You're not treated right in the United States.
Mhm.
I don't think black people, by and large, have historically really put much stock in these sorts of declarations and proclamations. But I think historically, when we look, they have sort of served as maybe confidence boosters, maybe feeling legitimized. Like
Mhm.
I said, like when we go in the gym with that personal trainer isn't obligated to, help pull that bar off your chest. When you
Right.
get on the bar, you got to do all the hard work.
Yep.
It's painful, but it's making you stronger. And eventually you want to get into sort of the fighting shape
Mhm.
that you project. But sometimes it can help to have a voice of motivation. But
Definitely. No,
we
I'm
have to
definitely
be,
with that.
like you said, to your point, to be leery of soothsayers or someone that will just sort of come along and be opportunistic.
Yeah,
Say, "Hey, we're going
exactly.
to play the good guy. We're going to come here and speak on what they're doing to those black people." Like
Yeah.
maybe if we look at China, and then in instance, and you turn around and you look at what they're doing in Africa and how they treat black citizens that are in China,
Right.
it's sort of like, okay, man, what's really your motivation here?
Exactly.
You're telling us how bad we're getting treated, and then you're not, hey, not you're doing it yourself, let
Right.
alone not doing anything about it. So
Yeah. No.
yeah,
But that's good. Yeah, we could. Well, yeah. So that's good. We can move on though. But I like the fact that we having this conversation. But
facts. Well, we got United Nations General Assembly. This is dated. This was distributed limited 17th of June 2020. This is the Human Rights Council 43rd session, 24th of February uh, through the 20th of March 2020. And this is just a couple of highlights. I'll just read the very first header here. It says the promotion and protection of the human rights and fundamental freedoms of Africans and people of African descent against police brutality and other violations of human rights. So we fast forward to 2020. This is a report from the United Nations General Assembly. Obviously, I believe this is the most recent one, and they
okay.
say they are alarmed, quote, alarmed at the resurgence of violence, racial hatred, hate speech, hate crimes, neo-Nazism, neo-fascism, and violent nationalist ideologies based on racial or national prejudice, including the resurgence of racial superiority ideologies that incite hatred and violence against Africans and people of African descent. What you
Mm.
got on that? Come on.
Africans and African descents, huh? See, I like it, but
Facts.
I like it. I like it. Facts. Facts. One fact that I know is that recently, there has been a push for the term African. First of all, is broad, okay? Because they're actually, I was filling out a birth certificate documentation recently, and on the documentation it said your ethnicity. What ethnicity are you putting for this child? And it said African, and underneath it it said white African, It said Ethiopian. It said Nigerian. It did all these things, but it didn't say nothing about the African American, nothing like that. It just had African, and then it had these subcategories. And I'm like, well, what's a white African? So not that you
Well,
can't have one, but this is the type of things that I pay attention to because now that they're trying to embrace it after all these years, um, they got all their ducks in a row. So even these reparations and all of this talk and this push, I do think that there's going to be some kind of underhandedness to say, well, what's an African now? You can't just say that it's a black person. An
right, right,
African can be anybody, and we won't be able to defend that because we're going to be like, well, they make the rules. So it's just like the Native Americans. So there are a lot of European people who claim Native American and get Native American benefits. Okay, but they're not Native American, and there's proof that people were paid to put Europeans on the Native American reservation list. It's the Dawes Commission report, if I'm not mistaken, and you can Google it. And they had this thing where I learned from a guy named Claude Anderson. He talked about how they called these people $5 Indians. Now, I'm not saying that in a racial way, just so you know, as a disclaimer, but that was the quote where people were paying underneath the table to become Native American so that they can get the benefits. And I don't think that is any different when I see a report like this because it's kind of repeating the same thing. But um, the timing of it to me is suspicious now that everybody can claim, especially in this identity crisis that Americans are going through, where as long as you identify with it, then you are it. So anybody can just say that they African, and black people can still be discriminated against if we not in the right places at the right time. So, like
right.
you said, I think that is beneficial to us, but we definitely cannot be sheep. We have to be, in a way, we have to be wolves. Like that mentality of everybody hold hands so we all get a piece of the pie. We really can't think like that because people don't think like that as it pertains to us. We'll get the leftovers, the scraps. The slaves always got the scraps. We don't want to get the scraps of reparations for black people. That's my thing.
And I
But
don't. Go ahead. Go ahead.
but no, I just kind of rambled on again because I kind of do that. But
No,
I
that's
do
not.
like I do like the I do like where this is going. Basically, I don't want to seem like I'm opposed of this report at all. But I am very adamant about letting black people know that we have to pay attention to every detail at this point in our fight for freedom in every way in every aspect.
No, I think you're right. I think, and there's nothing wrong with. Here's the thing: we are not of the mindset that we have to exist in absolutes. So if
Hmm.
we look at, we do it in every aspect of our life. When we're gonna go buy something, we're
Mm.
gonna order something off of the menu. We look at the different ingredients because we want to know everything that's going into that meal or where we're going to consume it. And so we may want to make changes. It doesn't mean that we're not going to eat. It means that we have to pay attention to what the cook is doing. And that's reasonable.
Mm.
But I think in the media atmosphere, sometimes we feel as if we're forced into absolutes in terms of like, okay, if you are, if you're a left wing freedom fighter, you take this in the whole package, right? So
Right.
you're going on Roland Martin and Don Lemon, and you got to take everything that comes with that.
Hmm.
Or, um, you know, no, I think it's healthy to look at, in this case, we're looking at what the UN is saying. Is it good? Is it bad? Is it something in between? It be used to our advantage? And if so, strategically, tactically, if we can use it, how? And then what does that mean?
Right.
And it's a healthy part of that process to say, what are their intentions? What does this language mean? Are they playing with the language here? Is this a ploy? And when and if we find that, the decision could be, do we nix this whole thing altogether, or
Right.
do we not throw the baby out with the bathwater, as it were? and just eat the meat and spit out the bones, sort of thing.
No,
So
that's
yeah,
real.
there's nothing wrong with being particular about it. I did want to comment. I find it interesting when you talk about this sort of watering down and changing and the perversion of language. And
Yeah.
for the longest time, they say, okay, we're African Americans, and that sort of inferred of dark skin.
Mm-hmm.
And African, we know it's at least in the popular mind, is it means dark skin. But technically, the word has always meant a nationality because
Right.
Africa is a continent.
Right.
In Africa, you got Ethiopians, you got Sinhalese, you've got people from the Congo, you got West, East, and you've got a lot of Asian settlements in Africa. When those babies are born there, they are Africans.
Yep.
But now it seems like the dominant society, the mind of the dominant society, loves to play with words.
Mm-hmm.
Loves to do this sort of language confusion thing because that becomes the means of communication and conveying messages. And if you can confuse the language, you can confuse the people because
Mm-hmm.
they're going to be hearing different things and they're going to be understanding different things
Right.
and they're going to be believing different things. So I think that, but I think this the fact that they are fiddling with languages and putting out messages and saying this and saying that, it's a response to some sort of pressure or motivation.
Right.
And that pressure and or motivation is something that, obviously they feel a need to respond to or act upon. And
Mm.
that's where we come in. I
Right.
think that the fact that you have, that we're questioning what is it that the UN is seeing. They're saying something that they're seeing, obviously, and they're citing it as, rights violations, human rights violations, ongoing legacies of slavery, etc. And the fact that they're having to voice that and that the mainstream is having to respond to it either by um, ignoring as a sort of response
Mm-hmm.
or an action or an inaction, and then this sort of sliding the language. Okay, yeah, hey, on all of our documentations, I hear moving forward, yeah, let's just start saying African can mean, whites also, and then hey, European can mean Latinos, and you
Mm-hmm.
can classify as and the very fact that they have to do that is a direct response from the heat.
Right.
And so in a way, it's a win, it's an acknowledgement. When you get into whether it's a wrestling match or say you're in a wrestling match and you're fighting your opponent and you engage, you go to the mat, and you're each struggling for position, and there's a constant ongoing opposition there. And then as you say, for example, rise up and get a position, you start to put leverage on that person. You'll
Mm-hmm.
see their position change. Their position will change because they're struggling to keep their footing. They're trying to, even if as they're going over,
Mm-hmm.
their position changes and they'll look different than they did a few moments ago.
Right.
But that's based on the exertion that you're putting. And even though the match is not over, the very fact that you have this tension and these shifting positions, it means that the match is ongoing, you know,
Mm-hmm. Right.
because if we were down and out flat on our backs, the enemy would have one position just standing on you,
Right.
period. But when we see these things, these reports coming out, sort of they're tweaking the census, they're finagling the numbers,
Mm-hmm.
right? Black people, you're still 13% of the population for all this time, even though, right? The other myth is that you got a bunch of welfare mamas that breed like rabbits and
Mm,
we're
right.
all over the place. Oh, but on the other hand, we're still 13% of the population.
Right.
And then on the other hand, right, we have these campaigns and we're skewing or health benefits. We're trying to kill your babies. We're trying to get you to buy into all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
Allegedly, we gotta
Right.
say that because
Allegedly.
YouTube is gonna ban them. But anyway, you have all this going on, and I say the very fact that we see it it is ironically, it's a confirmation of the level of threat that we present,
Hmm.
at least in a potential sense, if
Right.
not in an actual sense today.
Right. No, definitely, man. That is true. And I think
Hey,
that no, go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say, this UN, this report, General Assembly, man. When you know, at the right time, I'll read this out. They actually say what they they actually make a claim here of what they actually want to do or are
Oh, okay.
purporting to do. And I've got a blue highlight here. Um, so it's a verbal, it's a written condemnation per se, but
Hmm.
then they actually have something here. I'll just read this quick. Okay, this starts out welcoming all statements made by the special procedures regarding the killing of George Floyd, and in particular their joint statement of June 5th, 2020, and the statement made by the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights on June 3rd, 2020. Article 1 strongly condemns the continuing racially discriminatory and violent practices perpetrated by law enforcement agencies against Africans and people of African descent and the structural racism endemic to the criminal justice system in the United States of America and other parts of the world recently affected. Article 2 express alarm at the recent incidents of police brutality against peaceful demonstrators defending the rights of Africans and people of African descent. Article 3, and this is, I guess, here, there. Article 3 decides to establish an independent international commission of inquiry to be appointed by the President of the Human Rights Council to establish the facts and circumstances relating to the systemic racism, alleged violations of international human rights law, and abuses against Africans and people of African descent in the United States of America and other parts of the world recently affected by law enforcement agencies, especially those incidents that resulted in the deaths of Africans and people of African descent, with a view to bringing perpetrators to justice. Now, on that note, I just want to say this.
Hmm.
When you have an ongoing effort, and here another allegory or a metaphor here, you go to court, somebody, there's a wrong that happens,
Hmm.
and you want justice. So
Right.
you go to court, and the first thing that happens is you present the charges. Now this is before, when things are still even in the alleged state, in legalese. Lawyers will say alleged even though there's a video, or sometimes, whatever, this sort of necessary language of saying alleged and still has to be proved and case has to be proved or whatever. But the first thing that happens is the charges are presented, and depending on the jurors, right? The
Hmm.
skills of making the case, and then eventually something's got to happen at the end of that.
Hmm.
And I think that we are seeing, as we continue this legacy and fight for justice, we are seeing on a larger scale the phases of trial and error, and of actually, uh, like something that could be demonstrated as a trial for justice. Like these charges are presented ever, from the voices of us crying out, or you're doing this is wrong, and
Hmm.
any sort of manifestation of that. This UN report, while in and of itself and what they're saying they propose to do, is not the end all be all of it. But I
Right.
think it can be construed as a voice in a choir, amongst a symphony of time, circumstance, these charges that are being presented now and historically. And eventually, every trial must come to, a declaration and a sentencing phase.
Right.
So I think these things are really useful because whether or not it's a UN report or a video that goes viral, it all sort of goes into a general consensus that there is a situation and that there are things happening,
Right.
and that when we are to learn and to make moves and exact justice, it all comes from this sort of being informed, being informed of things. And I think eventually and inevitably these things come into play. I think they're part of just even just a natural happening,
Mhm.
right? When you hit someone, they cry out, and that takes many different forms. And we've been getting hit for a while, so we
Mhm.
can expect to see different voices, different forms of expression, whether it's through official news or media or what have you, and it all becomes sort of it's just a natural happening,
Mhm.
and that we don't. I think in that sense, as we move forward and continue with our heavy lifting, uh, certain things we have to be aware of and scrutinize to see if where we can use to our advantage.
Definitely. That's the truth. That's the biggest point and the biggest takeaway I think is just make sure that we use it to our advantage. And don't let it be something that is used against us, ironically, because it just happens and it happens a lot. But I think that the mindset of people is changing a lot, and I do think that this will be beneficial. All in all, I believe this report is huge, and I'm glad we're talking about it because I want people to understand that this report has been written, and so now is the time to really get involved in it. Read about it, but you do have to put a little work in it, like you said, some heavy lifting, and reading is actually the probably gonna be the easiest of the heavy lifting. So if you can't even read through the
Right,
articles and stuff like that, that really sets us back as as a people because we need people to be knowledgeable. It can't just be a few people who read the report doing all the talking because this is a big fight, and we're in a position where we can actually make huge progress, much needed
right.
progress, but we cannot just overlook it because right now you got Kanan and Faya. We said we read the report, and people just wait and see what we gonna do. Not saying that that's a bad thing, but we need other people's support. So let this be an inspiration.
Right. We encourage everybody to just step your game up, get your weight up. This intellectual weight that we need is not just it's not just for the matter of knowing something. It's a defense.
Hmm.
It's a defense and an offense. When you see Mayweather step in the ring, right, he can have the physicality, but if he doesn't have a boxing IQ,
Hmm.
then he's gonna get picked. It doesn't matter how strong he can be, that can only go so far.
Right.
You can take more hits if you are physiologically built for that. But it's not just enough to be built for that.
Right.
You need a boxing IQ so that you will know when to pull counter. You'll know what to recognize because you're making references to the past. When he
Hmm.
moves his right foot and does that little shuffle, he's gonna sway a little bit to his left. That's when I'm gonna catch him with the left hook.
Hmm.
That's an IQ. It's not just for the fact of bragging on an interview and saying, "Yeah, I got a boxing IQ." Nah,
Right. Right.
the proof
Exactly.
is in the pudding. When people see you in that fight and see you know what you're doing, that's when you're gonna get, who people typically, they root for. They, a winner, champion,
Hmm. Right.
and you gotta up your weight. You gotta up your IQ, and we encourage that. So as we move further with this channel, and we're just getting started. When we start to uh, when we start to accept suggestions from the listeners, and give people shout outs and everything like that, there will most likely be conditions put on that, like, okay, yeah, did you read the article, or how
Hmm.
many times did you share the video, right,
Hmm.
or send us a screenshot of you like the video or whatever, things like that, not just to maybe grow the channel in a selfish way, but it's an unselfish way because we're not getting paid for this, right? And then
Right.
we are, what we want to do is teach one or two or three, and then so
Yep.
that corresponds with a growing number of ears and listeners, and then getting help on board.
Hmm.
We can do this, and that's what I got on that.
No, that's real. That's basically what it boils down to. We all need each other, and we all need the support, and we all need everybody to be all hands on deck. In addition, we know that we all dealing with trying times, but we just have to do a lot better when it comes to stuff like this. So I'm glad, Faya, I'm glad you actually brought this report to my attention because I read through it. I'm going to continue to read through the second one because, like I said, I hadn't got to that yet before, but I'm definitely still going to read that, and I'll have more to say on that maybe in the future. But yeah. What,
Okay, yeah,
what
in the
other than
future.
that, man? Is it anything you wanted to close out with or wrap up with?
Not that I can think of like off the at the moment, man. I'm
Yeah,
glad
no.
we did it too. I think is really this is informative, and I just want to reiterate to people that um, this is not a stagnant sort of one-time thing like we talked about the UN report. And then if someone references this video and podcast and says, "Hey, they didn't talk about the UN report and opinion on
Right.
Jamaica or the colonization of Jamaica and on what that had to do, or Che Guevara and
Right.
whatever." This is an ongoing, open, like what we would call like a video essay. I think
Mhm.
Professor Black Truth likes to say that video essay, an ongoing thing that can be edited, redacted, built upon.
Right.
We're writing these things in pencil, not in ink. So
Mhm.
we got an eraser it and write the right things in there.
Exactly.
So that's how it go.
All right, man. Well, we appreciate the listeners again one more time. Thanks for tuning in. Always hit the like button and subscribe.
And
Other
tell
than
your
that,
mama, hit
tell
the
you
like button.
all day.
All right, man.